Today we're going to look at how to work with the Skybox and ground in Babylon JavaScript. But first I want to take a look at the virtual reality options in Babylon. We included that last time and didn't really look at what that impact is on the display. After we look at the virtual reality options, then we're going to examine why the box happened in our first tutorial, and then change those parameters and options for the Skybox and ground, and then finally we're going to create a better Skybox for our environment. Last time I did forget to mention how easy it is to implement the virtual reality. Again, our code for doing that was using the scene create default VR experience, setting the create device orientation camera to false, and then enabling teleportation. I'm not going to use teleportation at this time, but with these two lines of code, we're able to quickly and easily add virtual reality experience to any scene that we create. So I'll jump back over here to my scene. Down in the bottom right hand corner, you've got the switch to VR, and now I can move around inside my virtual reality. This works great on the Oculus Go. I haven't tried it yet on my Oculus Rift or an HTC Vive, but I was getting 30 frames per second on the Oculus Go. So not too shabby. You're able to go straight to your URL and load it up and have the virtual reality experience on that device. To exit your virtual reality mode, you can just hit escape on the keyboard, or if you're in Oculus Go, just hit your menu. When we left off last time, we had a simple building. The main problem was that we had a box left in the environment. This was the Skybox, and it actually does include Skybox as well as the ground in the environment. Now that's going with the default background color at this time. So let's take a look at how to adjust the Skybox so that it's a little bit more appealing inside of our game environment. So let's jump back to our script. In our original script, we created our environment with create default environment and enabled ground shadow and the ground Y bias. We didn't put anything else in for managing the ground or the Skybox at that time. So let's take a look at how to do that. And I've got this material already available on our website if you'd like to take a look at the code in a closer, more detailed way. So same code, we've got the environment here creating our create default environment. By default, Babylon will create a Skybox. So create Skybox by default is set to true. If you do not want a Skybox in your environment, all you need to do is change this value to false, and you'll no longer have a Skybox. Also by default, the Skybox size is set to 20. I increased that to 150 so we can see it, and let's make it stand out a little bit. So I'm going to change the Skybox color to teal so that it shows a little more. At the same time, create ground is also by default true. I'm only including the create Skybox and the create ground to make it very evident that these are a part of it. It's more of a teaching thing. You don't actually need these lines of code. By default, they are both set to true. Also by default, the ground size is set to 15. I've increased that to 200 to make it more obvious, and we're going to make it stand out a little bit more by changing the color to green, and we've left the enable ground shadow and the bias. Nothing else is changing in our code here, so let's save this and see what it looks like inside of our environment. And here we have our building inside of a Skybox that is set to a parameter of 200. We can still rotate around. We get up a little bit higher, you can see that the ground is green inside. We can zoom in a little bit. Whoops, a little too far. And the box, of course, has been replaced with the larger Skybox, so that's no longer evident. So we have a ground of green and our teal Skybox. Now, currently the Skybox is a little small for our environment, what we're necessarily shooting for, so we probably need to enlarge the Skybox and make this a little more evident. Plus, it'd be nice if the Skybox was actually reflective of a real environment. Babylon has some great resources already available. If you go over to GitHub, I'll include the link in the descriptions down below. If you go over to GitHub, you can download the entire Babylon.JS framework, and if you go to Playground and Textures, it includes several different types of skyboxes that can be included inside of your environment. Here are the textures that I loaded. I chose the default skybox. It uses the negative, positive, X, Y, and Z coordinate system, so you'll have a total of 6 JPEG images to create a skybox, which of course is a cube, has 6 sides. So we've got the negative X, the negative Y, the negative Z, as well as the positive X, positive Y, and the positive Z. This creates the box environment. The method that Babylon uses for loading in any kind of a skybox material for a cube is that you have the default name and then the extensions. The extensions being the underscored NX, NY, NZ, PX, PY, and PZ. So let's add this texture back to our environment. I've created a separate file. Again, you can see all of this on Burton's Media Group in the blog about creating skyboxes. So the code for creating this, I'm going to, in the environment, turn the skybox off. I'll go ahead and leave the ground to true. I'm not going to mess with that at this time. In a later lesson, we'll go over how to create a height map for creating ground and a better texture to the ground. But for right now, I'm just going to leave it as a ground size of 1000, dramatically increasing the size of it, and leave it as the green color. So let's go ahead and create our sky material then. The first thing we need to do is create a standard material, use the skybox method and associate it with the scene. We're not going to use any backface culling, so we'll set that to false. And then we need to load our textures. The sky material.reflection texture will be a new Babylon cube texture, as we mentioned before, the negative and positive X, Y, and Z, and that's going to be loaded from my subfolder textures with the name Skybox and loaded into the scene. We'll use the basic coordinate mode for the sky material, and then we'll set the diffuse and specular color for our sky material to black, 000, red, green, blue. Finally, we'll create the skybox. We'll use the mesh builder for creating a box, again with the type skybox. I'm going to set the size to 1000, load that into the scene, and set the skybox material to sky material. So setting the skybox.material property to what we just loaded in textures. When we load that in, we get a very different texture in our environment. Since we turned backface culling off, the texture actually shows on all 6 sides of the object of our cube. Since I don't have the camera set correctly yet to focus in on our object, we do need to zoom in to get on the inside of it. By default, the camera at this point in our coding will go looking at the entire object, which is our skybox. So let's zoom in, and there we have our building inside the environment. I really need to get that textured so it looks better. And as you can see, we've got our ground, so we get a much more compelling environment, something a little bit more attractive. Probably need to make the skybox a little larger or change the size of our building so it's a little smaller. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe to get the latest updates on what's happening with our series of tutorials on the Babylon JavaScript.